Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking to Kit Darby again. I hope you guys were able to see the first webinar, or if you saw it on YouTube that we did. We basically answered most of your questions. Everyone who's been asking about what it's like to become an airline pilot or pursuing a career as a pilot. So if you haven't seen that webinar or video on YouTube, make sure you go check it out. But in today's session, we're actually going to answer your questions directly. So over the last few weeks, we've collected a bunch of questions. And so if you asked a very specific question, you want to be here because that question is going to be answered. I hope you guys learned something from this. And if you have any more questions, just make sure you leave in the comments below or just get on the chat box and we'll try our best to answer the questions. All right, stay tuned. Okay, Kit, we're back for round two. So the way the process of this session is going to work, I basically have all of the questions that you all have asked in front of me, and I'm going to ask the expert, and hopefully we'll get the answers that we want. Okay, so I'll start with the very first question here, and if you see me looking down, it's because my computer is in front of me here. So one of the questions we had, the very first one says, if you're colorblind, how negatively does it affect your chances of becoming a pilot?
Well, there's the good news is that the test they give, it's called the Ishihara. It's a little book with colors in it where they flip through and you try to distinguish the colors.
Okay.
They're actually very difficult, more difficult than necessary. There is a light test that can be given by the FAA. And when they give the light test, most people do fine. So first of all, if you're colorblind by the normal test, you want to get the light test. And at that point, 85% of the people that take the light test actually pass the color test. So very few people. Now, if you're actually colorblind, they've made a lot of accommodations. You probably can take a practical test at the airport where they see what you can do. And again, another percentage come in. So very few people are colorblind to the point that they could not be a professional pilot.
All right, awesome. Awesome. Okay, next question. Are there any possible career choices for pilots that allows them to stay closer to where they live? I think you answered a little bit of this in the first session, but please help us answer this.
Well, it is often desirable for family reasons or whatever to be near your home. However, most flying jobs do include being away for a portion of the time. Now, to make that clear, some people think you're gone all the time, and other people think you're home a lot because they see their neighbor who's a pilot a lot. So in this case, we need to give it some dimension. The average airline pilot actually works about 15 days a month, meaning that you're gone in 3 or 4 day blocks or 2 to 5 day blocks, really. You might be gone 6 or 8 days a month, overnights. So you start the first day, you slept at home. You get home the last day, you sleep at home. And you might be gone a night or two in the middle. So it's not as much as you might think. But it is time away from home. So the jobs that we have that are not where you're not away from home would be things like flight training. And I know everybody's thinking, well, I don't want to be a flight instructor my whole life. But I'm a flight instructor. So I'm a flight instructor for Delta Professional Services here in Atlanta. And I work 20 miles from my home. I'm home every night. As a retired pilot, I sort of work the days that I want. I typically work 12 or 15 days a month, but that's by choice. So I'm home every night. So flight training is one way. Management would be another. Obviously, if you're managing the school or a manager at the airline, you work at their headquarters, you're home every night. But the vast majority of jobs will require some overnight service. It's where you're going to be gone. It is possible in the airline business with seniority, after you've been there a while, it would be possible to have trips that go out and back and come back to your home base every night. Now, most people don't want to do that, but you could do it if that was a priority for you. But again, most jobs are going to require some travel. I don't mean to say that it's easy to be home every night because it's not.
Wow, okay, great. Okay, so question number 3 from a viewer. Are there any more exciting flying jobs than airlines? Meaning, are there other options for professional pilots outside of the airlines? So, Kit, are there any more exciting pilot jobs out there?
Well, first of all, there's a belief, mostly by people who haven't done it, that an airline pilot is like a bus driver, that the job is boring, that you go here and there on a regular basis, and therefore it's not exciting. So I was a military instructor pilot on 5 different airplanes, an instrument examiner, both airplanes and helicopters. I left the service with a little over 4,000 flight hours. And I had lots of challenges there, and it was exciting flying. However, when I got to the airlines, I did not find the airline flying unexciting at all. For instance, in the last 10 years or so of my career, I would take off from Chicago and go to Europe or South America. I would fly 8, 10, 12 hours to get there, and everybody's thinking, oh, God, that must be terribly boring. However, I had 200 passengers. We were going to try to get there on time, within our 15 minutes. And my job was to do that smoothly and efficiently. So as an example, I could just put it on the autopilot and fly to Europe. But if I worked at it, if I got off early, which gave me arriving early, that allowed me to slow down. If I slow down, I use less power, so I can go higher. If I go higher, I can burn less gas and save money. All of that, crossing 4 or 5 weather systems and getting my 200 plus people there on time with an extra 6,000 pounds of fuel in the tank, I found that extremely challenging. So I don't find airline flying unchallenging. In fact, if you're bored in your airline job, you're probably not doing your job, because there's a lot to be done on every flight. So I disagree that it's not exciting, but there are a lot of other options. So we talked about that before, the corporate, fractional, which is sort of a form of it. And those corporates got maybe 25,000 people flying large twins or bigger aircraft. There's military flying, of course, military contract flying, where you work for the military, survey, crop dusting, fish spotting, fire spotting, ferrying aircraft, working for the FAA, flight test, aircraft sales. There's a lot of things you can do. Are they more exciting? Depends on the particular mission. But I found airline flying exciting enough for me.
Awesome. Okay, so next question is, what's the best way to transfer from military aviation to commercial aviation? That's a good question.
Well, military aviation is a great start. I mean, the airlines like military candidates. The reason is that they've been carefully screened. In fact, the military can do screening tests that are illegal in the civilian world. So they've been thoroughly screened. They get good training, good equipment, good training. They wear a uniform and follow the rules. So they're going to fit into a large organized company like an airline. So the airlines like these guys. One of the things they like about it is verifiable training. So they know what military flight training is. You go here, you do this, they keep record of it. So they're very comfortable with what you've had in the background. And that's a little different than the civilian world, where one guy might get great flight training at a good school and another one might not. So they got that verifiable stuff going on for them. So they're good candidates. What the pilot himself can do is he needs to start early. If he thinks he might want to be a civilian pilot, he needs to get his civilian pilot licenses. He needs to have a 4-year degree with a good GPA. Most of us have already done that, so you can't change it. On your civilian ratings, we're talking about getting your commercial, of course, taking an ATP CTP course, which is a week-long written and simulator course prior to taking your airline transport pilot written, your practical, which is a multi-engine ATP, and perhaps a type rating. And the type rating at smaller airlines, they'll buy a type rating for you. But to be an airline pilot today, you must be an ATP with a type rating. And in some cases, the type rating can be an asset to get you in the door. You need to network with your friends. Other military pilots that are coming out and getting the job, they're going to go through a process. They know what it's like, and you need to learn from them. So you want to have a good network and work together with your friends, just like you should as a civilian pilot. You shouldn't be trying to do this in isolation. Find your friends that are doing the same thing. Stay in touch with them. Go to the job fairs, the industry events and conventions. Job fairs are extremely effective. I said last time that my stepson was the youngest pilot hired at Southwest Airlines by 18 months. And he got that job at a job fair at a minority convention called Women in Aviation. There's one OBAP, Organization of Black Aviation Professionals. There's Latino pilots, gay pilots, all types of minority pilot organizations. And the airlines all go to these meetings. And you don't have to be black or a woman to go to them. You can sign up and go. The airlines will be there. And that face-to-face contact is invaluable. Finally, the social media. I mean, things are happening fast these days. A lot of times their websites, even their own website, will be out of date. You need to be on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. You've got to be watching the companies that you want to work for on social media, or you're going to miss the late-breaking news that might get you the break you need. So military guys, start early, stick with it, be patient and persistent, work your network. The job market, again, is going to return, my estimation, in 2 to 3 years.
Wow, awesome. Next question. This is actually funny. Says, I've heard commercial pilots are forced to retire at the age of 60. Is there any truth to this? Are you forced to retire? And also, the next part of that question says, what health... Hold on. It says, what are some of the health and age limitation for flying professionally? So are you forced to retire at 60? I didn't know that.
Well, up until 2007, you were. In fact, I retired in early 2007 at age 60. But in November, late November of 2007, they changed the law to 65. And there's a great deal of speculation that it may go to 67 or higher. Some countries don't have an age limit where you can fly as long as you can maintain your medical. But the U.S. right now is 65. And you talk about the medical things that happen. Of course, you are dependent on having a medical to be a pilot. So keeping yourself in good shape, eating right, getting your rest, exercising, that has to become a lifestyle. As you approach 65, it's increasingly difficult to maintain that physical if you're overweight, out of shape, catch diabetes, whatever. Things get a lot tougher. So I highly recommend a healthy lifestyle, not only good for mental health and good in the job search because you look good in uniform, but also necessary to have the benefits. Remember, we said these jobs in today's dollars were worth an average of $10 million.
Right.
To get that value, you need to work to 65. So stay healthy and do your part in order to benefit from this career.
Wow. Okay. Next question. Can I be a charter pilot and a British Airways pilot at the same time? Meaning, can I fly charter in my off time? So is that possible? Can you?
It's to say, I don't know much about British Airways or the rules in
Just
England.
In
so
general.
I'll have to answer from a U.S. position.
Okay.
But there are limits on how much you can fly each month. And if you're getting paid for the charter flying, which I assume would be the reason for doing it, that's paid flying as well. So it would be easy to exceed the limits by having two jobs. The other thing is most airlines restrict any other paid flying while you're working for them. And the exception would be military flying. So I was a pilot in the Guard for, I was 8 years of active in the balance, 15 years in the Guard. And I flew in the Guard, and that time did not count against my time limits. But other flying, particularly charter flying where you're paid, would count toward your limits. So you'd have to be careful there. The answer would generally be no, and I can't really answer for Britain because I'm not actually sure about Britain.
Right. Okay, good. Any advice for an upcoming student pilot?
Yes, sir. There's a number of things. You want to get, the first step I would say would be get a medical, a first-class medical, which costs a little extra, a little bit more than a student pilot license, which includes a medical, or even more than a second class, which is for a commercial license. But you want to be sure you can pass that medical standard day one. You wouldn't want to spend a lot of time and money trying to become a professional pilot, which requires a first-class medical, and find out that you can't get one. So the first thing is to get a first-class medical. The second thing I would say is take an introductory flight and fly a simulator. Let's make sure that we actually like to do this. I mean, it may seem fun from afar, but when you're actually doing it, do you actually enjoy flying the airplane? If you enjoy driving, you're probably going to enjoy flying. It's just three-dimensional driving. But you need to get out there and give it a try. Next thing is evaluate your budget and your timing. It's going to take time and money to become a pilot. Do you have the budget? Can you quit your job and go flight train straight through for 6 months or a year? If you can, that's fantastic. But a lot of people don't have the time or maybe don't have the money to go straight through. And they get caught in what I call work, save, fly. They're going to have to work and save up for their private license, go out, fly and get it, take a break, save, train, and take a break. So it's work to get the money, save the money, fly, get a license. Don't stop short of the license. If you stop short, when you come back, that money's wasted. So get a license, take a break, and do it again. It slows you down, but it's a way to get it done on a limited budget. Well, there are scholarships and so forth available too. While we're talking about it, finding ways to get help. We'll talk about that perhaps later.
Right, and we mentioned also in the first webinar that Sling Pilot Academy, which is a partner actually who's helping us put this session together, also offer yearly scholarships at the rate of $20,000. That's a lot of money to pass by. Anyway, next question is, does a commercial pilot license really cost as much as a bachelor's degree? And do most pilots only make $20,000 a year? I think we covered a little bit in the first, but please answer that if you can.
Well, it doesn't. I mean, it depends on the bachelor degree you get and where you get it. If you get it out of state at a large name school, it's going to cost a ton of money. Flight training, again, you can have a variable amount, but normally your degree, 4-year degree, is going to cost more than your flight training. But the flight training is an additional cost. So the two together can be quite an obstacle. One of the problems is that the 4-year school training can be financed a lot of different ways, whereas flight training doesn't have that many financing options. So often it's going to be the case where you need to borrow against assets. You may need to get a cosigner, a relative or a friend to cosign to get it. There aren't that many options for financing flight training. A lot of that flight training financing went away with 9/11 and the big recession in 2008 because there were a lot of people that were unsuccessful in paying back their loans. So the lenders stopped lending money for flight training, and they were just starting to do it again. They were just starting to make flight training available, financing for flight training available, and we'll have to see what happens now with what's going to be a recession over the next few years.
Okay. So the next question is, how does one pay for flight school? When you're expected to drop around $15,000 just for your private pilot license. So what are the options for anyone who is aspiring to be a pilot right now? What are their options to be able to either get a loan or finance that process or the program? What options do they have?
Well, we talked about scholarships, and a lot of them go unused. I mean, there are a lot of them people don't apply for. A lot of the big organizations offer multiple scholarships. Some of them are partial, some of them are complete. The Women Aviation Conference that I talked about, they give away anywhere from $500,000 to $750,000 worth of scholarships every year.
Wow.
So that is a really big deal. Other organizations have smaller contributions, but they're available. So there are listings of scholarships. There's a listing at Flight Training Magazine, AOPA Flight Training Magazine. All the big organizations, EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, National Business Aircraft Association, NBAA, all these big organizations are offering scholarships. So it would be another webinar to talk about all the options available. But if you need help, you need to go looking because there's quite a bit of help available. The personal loans we just talked about in the last question, personal loans where you're borrowing against assets, your home, stocks, that type of thing, co-signing with a family or friend, and the work, save, fly concept. Most people without outside help are going to do the work, save, fly. Financing is the biggest issue. There's no lack of people in this world that want to be pilots. There's no lack of pilots that want to be professional pilots. And there's no lack of airline pilots that want to be professional pilots that want to be airline pilots. The real problem is financing. So working your way through that is one of the biggest obstacles to becoming a professional pilot.
Okay. Next question. Can you offer some insights on being an aerial survey pilot?
Well, I actually did a little research online for survey pilots, and there are quite a few listings for a survey. My first caution would be that it's a very small segment. When you want to narrow the segment that much, what percentage of jobs are aerial survey? Less than 1%. So do you want to go into a career field that has a high initial cost, expensive training, and shoot for just 1% or less of the jobs? So normally, pilots aren't that key on the mission. They're keyed on flying bigger, faster airplanes with more motors. Go fast and make noise. We joke that's what we want to do. So focusing on survey pilot is not typical, and I would be concerned that you're limiting your market by a significant amount. So yes, there are survey pilot jobs. Would that be my career goal going into this training? I would try to keep an open mind and have a broader career goal if possible.
Okay, good. Next viewer asks, I have a multi-commercial pilot license with instrument rating, but I don't want to be an instructor to get my 1,500 hours. Is there any way I can build time without being an instructor? That's a good question.
Well, it is a good question, and a lot of people feel that way, and I'm not sure why they don't want to be an instructor. I mean, to talk about that, most people do it as an instructor. So I'll talk about the other options, but you have to realize that majority of people build their flight experience as an instructor. There's a lot of jobs there. There's a lot of flight hours there. So getting in at low time is pretty easy as a flight instructor. It's very difficult in these other positions. So be careful that you're not turning away just because you think you don't like it. Let's make sure. There are those, I've been flight instructing my whole life, and I sort of like it. So I want to say, first, rethink it, okay? And then let's talk about the other things. So you can get corporate. You can get a corporate job. It doesn't require an ATP. So with a commercial license, you could get hired by corporate. Corporate is very much who you know. So what I recommend to people is they get a business card and a resume, and they go out to the airport and meet people in the corporate environment. If you know somebody, they can give you a job if you meet the minimum requirements. There are also insurance requirements, so not just the rating and the flight time, but they have to be able to insure you. A note on insurance. A lot of companies say, oh, I can't hire you. You don't meet our insurance minimums. Well, they can hire you. It's just that the insurance is going to cost more. The insurance doesn't say you can't hire somebody with less time. The insurance says it costs this if they have 1,000 hours. It costs this if they have 500 hours. So that's going to be the difference. We talked about fractional. You probably don't qualify as a 400-hour pilot. You could get in the Guard or Reserves. Survey might work. Crop dusting, fish spotting, fire spotting, those types of things. Aircraft sales, things you could get into with low time, but most people do it as a flight instructor. So I highly recommend that you reevaluate your goals. It'll help you get you from where you are to where you want to be as quick as possible. The airlines love flight instructors. The old adage that you don't know it until you teach it, they've learned that is true. So they love people that have been reviewing the fundamentals and teaching others. They make great airline pilots.
Wow, awesome. Now, next question, I think you answered for us a little bit. The question is asking what jobs are available for somebody who has a commercial pilot license but with only 400 hours. I think you touched on a little bit just in the last answer you gave. So if I had a commercial license right now, but I only have 400 hours, what other jobs would be available to me?
Like I said, the lower end jobs, traffic watch, fire spotting, fish spotting. There are very few jobs. Banner towing, which is risky, but there are people that go to the beach and get a couple of hundred hours a month towing banners, going 40 miles an hour up and down the beach in a Piper with the doors off. So, and it's a race to total time. Remember, the first thing was to get qualified. When you're building experience, it's a race to 1,500 hours. So things like banner towing can work for you.
Okay, cool. Next question again is about age. Says I'm 47 years old. Can I still pursue a career in aviation? It says I'm currently working on my private now, and then I plan to use my GI Bill from the Army to get my commercial license. So for somebody who's 47 now, is this still a viable option for them to pursue a career as a pilot?
Well, there are no age limits other than the 65. And we see the airlines on a regular basis hire pilots in their 50s and even 60s. So he is certainly viable in the market once he's qualified and gets the experience, which will take a couple of years to get the training and get the experience. But no, he will not be limited because he's in his early 50s or even his early 60s from becoming an airline pilot.
Okay. Now this next question is very interesting. It says, can experimental aircraft be used to transport cargo such as medicines? Tends to make profit on flying. How do people make the experimental aircraft make money for them? So I don't know if there's any legal aspect to this, but basically they're asking if they can use an experimental aircraft to make money.
Yep. This is a double problem here. I mean, first of all, the pilot has to be licensed.
Right.
So to make money, you would have to have a commercial license. I'm not sure this question has that pilot has a commercial license. Okay. And then I am not that expert. I'm not expert at all on experimental aircraft, but I don't believe experimental aircraft are typically used in commerce. So I don't believe you've got to be a pilot. You got to get a higher license. Got to have a commercial. And then you've got to have an airplane that can be used. And I don't believe experimental airplanes are typically used in things other than firebombing. You know, there's some experimental airplanes that are used in various operations, but it's not a normal thing. So get a commercial license, have a regular airplane, not experimental, and then you have a much better chance of like owning an airplane and using it in flight instruction. That would be the most typical way to own and use an airplane.
Okay. Next question says, I'm getting my private pilot license. I'm a welding inspector. I would like to transition into survey flying. How many hours do I need to become employable? So for survey flying, what are the typical requirements?
I did a little bit of research, but I didn't do enough to answer the hours portion of that. Okay. Each one's in the job listing, they're going to show the minimums. But I'm going to guess it's not going to start any lower than 500, and it may be higher. You need a multi-engine rating if you're using a multi-engine airplane to go with your commercial license. And again, the insurance, you're going to come up right against their insurance when you say, I'm available. They say, we'd like to hire you, but we require 500 hours for our insurance, that type of thing. There's also going to be other minimums. Survey flying could take you into nighttime or instrument conditions. They may require night experience, instrument rating, instrument experience. Final comment is it's a very narrow goal. I mean, again, there just aren't very many survey pilots. So if you could broaden your horizon a little bit and fly in other areas, you'll have a lot more jobs available to you. Survey pilot is just a tiny fragment of the jobs. You've eliminated 99.5% of the jobs out there by saying that you want to fly only survey.
Okay. Next question. How can I keep my current career and still be hired as a pilot for somebody who needs it? Actually, no, the exact words is, how can I be hired as a pilot for someone on as needed basis? So they have a career now, and if they wanted to have, be a pilot as a second job on an as needed basis, is that possible?
It is possible. However, it is unlikely. You typically have to do enough full-time flying to become a professional. So it would be hard to start out in part-time flying. But if you've got some experience, there are companies, a lot of corporations have people go on vacation. They need a fill-in pilot. That can happen. There are training companies that need people from time to time on a part-time basis. So there are part-time opportunities. There's a number of simulator co-pilot positions. People like flight safety and all hire and train you on the airplane and you fill in as a co-pilot when they have to train a captain and they don't have a co-pilot. So there are things you can do, but in most cases you're going to have to do some full-time professional flying to get the qualifications and experience you need to be a fill-in pilot. It's hard to start out as a fill-in pilot. I would encourage you to volunteer yourself. There's a lot of single pilot operations. Single pilots, they can fly night and instrument conditions by themselves, but they typically don't like it. And it's far better to have a crew when you're in more demanding circumstances. So if you know people that are flying by themselves, and tonight it's a dark and stormy night, would they like to have a co-pilot? You bet they'd like to have a co-pilot. You might do it for free for a while, but the time may come when you can work as a paid co-pilot on an as-needed basis on those flights that are more demanding.
Okay, awesome. Next question is, what's a good degree to get before I go to flight school? I think we talked about this a little bit in the first session. So what's a good degree to get in academics before going to flight training?
Well, last time we talked, the most efficient way to do it would be to get the flight training first and then go to school while you're building experience. That would get it done quicker, but it's very hard to do. It takes a lot of discipline. You can't have a big honey-do list and a family, all that stuff going on when you're trying to both work and go to school. It's very demanding. So any degree will do. I mean, it doesn't have to be a technical degree, although they like technical degrees. Any degree will do. It's important, if you want to work for Delta, for instance, they like to see that you complete the 4-year degree in 5 years or less and that you have a good GPA. They like 3.0. They'll work with you down to 2.5. Below 2.5, you need to have a good explanation. You need to have been playing sports or working full-time or doing a lot of extracurricular activities that caused you to have a lower GPA. If you just have a low GPA and you didn't do anything else, that's going to be trouble. Next, I say technical degrees are good. Top schools, they like, if it's a tough school, if you're going to MIT or Stanford and you make a lower GPA, well, that's understandable. If you're taking aeronautical engineering, that's understandable. But again, any degree will do. Extracurricular activities really matter. So if you're doing clubs, sports, leaderships in those clubs, internships, honors and awards, if you're working on the side or volunteering, all those things are important. So keep those as part. If you have a lower GPA, then those extracurricular activities become important. Of course, if you have a good GPA and do all those extracurricular stuff, that's the best.
Wow. Okay. Next question is, what is the most effective way to make money with your own aircraft? Also, does a well-groomed man with long hair have a shot in the industry outside of the airlines?
Well, two things. The leaseback is typically done for flight instruction. It could also be corporate. Depends on the airplane. Corporate's going to want typically a bigger, faster, multi-engine airplane, so not many of us can afford that to start with. But the single-engine airplanes are typically used in some corporate, but mostly in flight instruction. So the long hair thing, I've got to tell you that most of these companies have dress codes. So when you show up for work, you're supposed to have a certain look, and it typically does not include long hair. So the bigger companies, the bigger airline, any airline, bigger companies especially, are not going to tolerate long hair unless you hide it, basically. So they might let you put it up, under a hat or whatever. But in most cases, long hair is a disability. You're not going to get easily hired. Now, a smaller corporation or a small company, they can do whatever they want. If you're flying entertainers in a corporate environment and they all have long hair, you might fit right in. But typically, if you're going to be flying in a business environment, they're going to expect a business look, and the business look doesn't normally include long hair. So be careful there. You might have to cut it to get your training and experience, and then you can let it grow. One great way to do whatever you want in an airplane is to have a company that is successful enough to afford an airplane. If you're the boss, you can do whatever you want with that airplane.
There you go. There you go. Okay, next question. I'm a military officer that is retiring in 2 months. I have no prior aviation experience. I would like to fly commercial as my retirement job. Is there a reason I should not do this considering the investment costs to get my IFR and commercial certification?
Well, he doesn't give us his age, but and we've already talked about 47 is not too old. So typically a retiring military officer after 20 years or 25, he's going to be in his late 40s. Sort of the same question we asked before, is very viable. No reason that he can't successfully do it. He may have the GI Bill available to help him pay for it, so that'll reduce the cost, and the value remains the same. So being military with the GI Bill, you pay less for the training, but you get the same value out of the training that someone that paid full price. So I would say typically it's a good deal. Right now it's going to be a tough market, but if he's just getting out and getting started, we've talked about this, it's going to take a year or so to get trained. It's going to take a year or two to get the experience you need. So 2 or 3 years from now, it should be good timing for him.
Okay. Next question. With the markets changing with the pandemic, would a Part 135 air taxi service be a good idea for short haul flights in the Rocky Mountains regions?
Okay, so we're coming into a tough time. We're coming into a tough job market, and a recession, may even be a depression. It's going to be tough. So I would say in those times, in the short term, what he's talking about, any flying job is a great job. I mean, if you have a job, keep it. If you can get a job, take it. You need to ride through this rough period doing whatever you can do. And if you can stay in an airplane, that's terrific because you're still building total time and experience, staying current. Those are important things in hard times. If you can't do that, if you end up in a non-flying job, get back to flying as soon as you can. They'll respect that in the long run. Not everybody will be able to keep a flying job in hard times. The multi-engine turbine, if it's corporate or charter or Part 135, remember the airlines like what you like. What do? They fly multi-engine turbine airplanes in and out of high-density airports and schedule passenger operations. The closer you can get to that, the better. So charter is pretty good. It's flying passengers. They would like that experience.
Wow. Okay, speaking of non-flying jobs, the next question is, are there opportunities for A&P mechanics to learn how to fly for free?
Okay, well, the mechanics are actually a greater shortage than the pilots. I mean, they were running out of pilots before this current problem. Oh, yeah. However, they were flat out of mechanics. I mean, mechanics. One of the problems is you train mechanics, and they can go fix airplanes, but they can also fix cars or refrigerators or whatever. So there's a lot of other opportunities for people with that type of training. So the airlines were really short of trained mechanics. Now, they will, as other companies that have flight training, if you were maintaining their airplanes, you could potentially get no cost or reduced cost flight training and qualify and move to the flying side of things. Be careful, though. The airlines have a very different profile for technicians than they do for pilots. And I always joke that when you say you have an A&P license or been an A&P in the past, they look at your fingernails. And what they're trying to see is whether you've been fixing airplanes or whether you've been flying airplanes, because your hands show what you've been doing. So it's a bit of it's a joke. I laugh with you, but if you want to be a professional pilot, you need to transition to flying as quickly as possible and leave the AM. And it may be a big part of your life. You know, you learn to do it. You've done a lot of it. You're good at it. And you get in an interview and you want to talk about being a mechanic rather than being a pilot. That's a bad idea, because they have a very different profile for successful technicians than they do for pilots. Pilots are very mobile. They move around. They take the job wherever it's at. Technicians tend to be very locally oriented. They don't want to leave. They work in the area. If they can't fix airplanes, they'll fix cars.
Okay. Actually, some comments to add to that. So I know one or two A&P mechanics that actually are also pilots. And for this particular question, I don't know if you're asking particularly to maybe get a private pilot license or if you want to go all the way to commercial. But what I imagine is if you have access to airplanes, which you will if you're fixing other people's airplanes, a way to fly for free is to exchange your service for time in the plane. You can always do that with owners. And also, I think that if you were to either go that route and once you maybe earn even your commercial license, you can fly airplanes back and forth for owners and charge additional. So I think there are ways for you to actually add more income to your business if you're an A&P mechanic. But I think that's one way you can possibly fly for free, to exchange your service for flight time or instructor time, whatever the case may be. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, you absolutely could barter. I mean, that's a great way to do it. You could barter. But again, I caution you to if you want to be a pilot, to transition to full-time flying as quick as you can.
Right. Okay, so we're at the last question here. To what extent will a top-class flight school be beneficial to finding your first jobs compared to a low-cost flight school? Now, there's probably different side to that question, but maybe you can answer the first one is just in general, to what extent does your flight school or your training school help you find your very first job as a pilot?
Well, it really varies a lot. I mean, if you are, say that you're a member of a really big flight school in the area, and they know that flight school. So you're on the West Coast or you're in the Northeast or whatever, and you go to a known flight school, a large, successful flight school, and that's all they do is produce professional pilots. They're likely going to be known by the airline that works in that area. But let's say that you're training in Miami and the airline you're applying to is in Seattle. They're not going to have any idea about that flight school. So you might want to find out the schools that the airline values. And you can do that, like if you go on their website, the Delta has a Propel program. Propel program associates with a number of aviation schools. Those schools, we know that Delta respects the graduates from those schools. If you wanted to work for Delta, you couldn't do better than training at one of those schools. So you got to be smart about it. You can't go to a school in Seattle and expect it to carry weight in Miami. That's not going to work. But if it's a well-known school and they're working with somebody, a lot of them work on transition programs, make sure that the airline knows about their school and they know they have a good product, they'll be glad to get you. But if they don't know about it, they can't give you credit for it.
Wow, okay, awesome. Okay, there you have it, guys. I hope you've taken a lot of good information from this webinar. And if you're watching this on YouTube video also, I hope you've learned a lot. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this was actually help put together by Sling Pilot Academy. So for a lot of you who have been asking these questions, if you're ready to jumpstart your pilot journey as a commercial or airline pilot, use the link below. You can check out Sling Pilot Academy. They're based in Torrance, California, and they have a full accelerated program that you can opt into right now. But more importantly, if you use the discount code MojoGrip, you get a discount for signing up. But also, you can always reach out to me for that. But guys, thank you so much for watching. We're still accepting more questions, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of this depending on Kit's schedule. But if you have any more questions, just leave in the chat or leave below, or just email me, Mike@mojogrip.net, and I will try to pass your questions along. Thank you so much, and be safe.